Kirsten, what is this story about?
It's about Minnesotans with mental illness in the criminal justice system. They're falling into a gap where they're unable to resolve their case, but also can't receive treatment that they desperately need. And we found more people are falling into this gap than ever before. They're called the lost souls.
I love my son, and I just don't believe that he's being treated fairly.
Erin O'Neill adopted her son Jude when he was 3 years old.
He was very sweet. He was very sweet, he was very social, he was very personable. To most people, Jude looks very normal and at first presents very normally, so the rest of the world kind of didn't pick up on his disabilities.
When Jude was 12, he was diagnosed with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. A psychologist warned Erin that because Jude functions at the level of an 8-year-old child, he would likely struggle with mental health issues his entire life. And as he became a teenager, things got even more difficult. She says he started hanging out with the wrong sort of crowd. And she said as soon as he turned 18, he ran. And he started getting in trouble.
I told his public defender that given his disabilities, he would never be able to successfully complete probation without extensive supports, and there were none. He got in trouble again.
Jude has been arrested and charged more than a dozen times in Minnesota. And most often, these crimes involve him driving a stolen vehicle. In almost half of those cases, 6 of those cases, his competency has come into question.
I think Jude's case is a perfect example showing that the court process is extremely flawed.
Travis Kyle is Jude's attorney, and most of the people he defends struggle with mental illness and competency.
It's just a revolving door with these individuals, and it's just sad that they're not getting the assistance and help that they need.
They end up in this complicated process, commonly known as Rule 20. Here's how it works. A defendant is arrested and charged with a crime. If there are issues raised about that person's mental health, a judge will order a psychological evaluation or a Rule 20. If the defendant is found competent, the case continues. If they're found incompetent, the court can refer them for what's called civil commitment. This is involuntary court-ordered treatment and is only granted if the defendant is found to be a danger to themselves or others, and that bar is very high. If the defendant does not meet that standard, nothing happens. They fall into this gap where they either sit in jail until they're competent or they're released into the community. Jude has been in this cycle for almost 6 years now.
He feels worse and worse about himself, and he has a longer and longer history.
It's a lot of lost souls, a lot of people who are just out there and are probably going to have the same thing happen over and over and over again.
Over the last decade, judges and those in the criminal courts in Minnesota started to realize there were a lot of people that were presenting with mental health issues, and this was costing them a lot of money. So they stepped back and they started to study the issue. What the court found was 60% of criminal defendants are found incompetent to stand trial, but that they don't meet the bar to receive inpatient mental health treatment. This is the gap everyone is worried about, and it becomes a revolving door for people like Jude. Have you seen that in your case?
Yes.
On the
I've had cases where I have looked through the files and seen repeated Rule 20s ordered.
The majority of people who fall into the gap are accused of nonviolent crimes, but there are exceptions that can result in devastating consequences. We just saw that happen in Buffalo.
And we are tracking breaking news
67-year-old
tonight.
Gregory Ulrich faces 7 counts, including second-degree murder.
Gregory Ulrich fell into the gap. Less than a year before he was arrested for the shooting, he was accused of harassing workers at the same clinic. Ulrich was found mentally incompetent, which meant the misdemeanor charge had to be dismissed. But there's no record that he was court-ordered into treatment. The same thing happens to hundreds of people who fall into the gap. They can't stand trial, and yet they can't go to a hospital.
That's an enormous problem, obviously, because for the person, they have no means of resolving this important matter in their life.
One of the ways to do that is through competency restoration, or the process of helping a defendant understand what's happening in their case.
One of the problems is that there's really one place to receive competency restoration services, and that's through the state hospital system.
We evaluate them for admission into one of our programs and one of our hospitals.
Dr. Kylie Ann Stevens is Executive Medical Director of Behavioral Health for DHS. In her role, she oversees all of the treatment programs that DHS offers. For a long time, the Department of Human Services would hang on to people in the state hospital and treat them until they were competent. That way, they could go straight from the state hospital back to court to resolve their criminal case.
We did this at a time when there were very few referrals for competency treatment. We did it because we had the capacity to provide that limited service.
And by doing that, attorneys and judges say DHS helped some people stay out of the gap. But that changed in 2018 when they stopped holding people until they were competent.
Our goal is to treat people to mental health stability. And once someone is no longer in need of our services and care, it doesn't make sense for us to use our beds for people who are stable and don't require that level of care.
Should DHS be responsible since they have previously done that sort of education?
It's a complex question. It's important to understand that DHS has not been required to do competency restoration. It's not in the statute.
Dr. Stevens says if they were required by law to provide competency restoration, it would need to come along with a lot of resources and a lot of money. Because DHS had a practice of doing this for so long, many of the stakeholders that are engaged on this issue believe it should be their responsibility.
I know that there were some of us that felt a little taken off guard because all of a sudden we were just told it was no longer going to happen.
Who needs to be responsible for restoring to competency?
It seems to me that we're going to have to, somebody's got to stand up and say, it's mine.
But we got to stop talking about it and actually do something about it. Just kicking the issue down the road. And we've been doing that for years. I mean, this is nothing new whatsoever.
So if this has been an issue for so long, why has there not been kind of tangible solutions brought forward to fix this?
That's an excellent question. And it's not that the problem hasn't been recognized. The problem has been recognized.
We're coming at it from different ways. And meanwhile, the work is voluminous. So there's a lot to do.
It's very frustrating. I try to tell people our mental health system is broken. The reality is it was never built.
Mental health advocates want to get to these individuals before they're ever in the criminal justice system. They want to see early intervention, at the very least, diversion into treatment once they are in the criminal justice system.
But you have to do it early. You can't wait till the very end like what we do right now. Once you've been involved in the criminal justice system, finding housing now becomes harder. Finding a job now becomes harder.
The places where you do see change are operating separate of the system as a whole. They're doing this piecemeal approach where one county has one program and one court has another. But at this point in the state of Minnesota, there's been no holistic, system-wide fix.
If there's not a legislative fix, I'm not particularly hopeful that anything will change.
Well, nobody likes too much government, but government in the right way to help people is kind of why we're around. You know, we're fine with dealing with roads and bridges, but Jesus, let's deal with people.
I love my son ferociously. He's the best thing that's ever happened to me, but I can't accept the way the world is treating him. I just can't. It's wrong to victimize somebody because he's too disabled to advocate for himself, and I think that's what's happening.
About a year ago, Jude was arrested for driving a stolen vehicle and fleeing from police.
I've had people say, well, he'll go to jail, but at least he'll have a roof over his head. But his disability shouldn't have to be criminalized for him to get services that he needs.
His psychiatrist reports that the longer he sits in jail, the more his mental health deteriorates, the worse he gets.
I don't know what the answer is, but I know we have to stop victimizing the most vulnerable people among us.